Welcome back. It's Friday, March 7th, and we have had yet another significant change to the forecast for Tropical Cyclone Alfred, where even more stalling has occurred during the overnight hours, and as a result, our coastal landfall has been pushed back even further. In today's forecast, we're going to break down everything you need to know, including the current track path, forecast timing, system intensity, and possible impacts and hazards. Here's what we're currently looking at this morning on the latest satellite imagery, where we can see here convection has actually begun on the northern portion of the tropical cyclone, something that has been absent for quite a period of time, where we've only really seen the south to southwesterly quadrants and periphery of the system have any sort of convection on the previous day's satellite imagery. But we can see here now that it's moving into slightly warmer water and probably locally decreased vertical wind shear, we can see here the system has actually been able to ramp up the convection a little bit, which will likely see the system maintain itself as a category 2 before crossing tomorrow somewhere around the category 2 to category 1 threshold, just probably north of the Brisbane metro area. We can see similar things here on the visible satellite imagery for today, where the north and south portion of the tropical cyclone has this ongoing convection. We can see here the cirrus anvils popping up where the ongoing thunderstorm activity is occurring, as well as the outer feeder bands of the system, which are already pushing onshore well into southeast Queensland, delivering heavy rainfall as they progress. But certainly the central area of low pressure is still quite far offshore. In fact, it's around 200 kilometers offshore at this point in time, which will continue to track westward during the overnight hours before making landfall tomorrow morning. Now, if we take a look at the Bureau of Meteorology's official forecast track map, the most recent track map, we can see here Alfred definitely taking this sort of deviated path, very wobbly in nature, where it has progressed slightly south overnight, indicated by that little bit of a dip down in the track map we can see here on the path. Now, the system is likely to continue as a category 2 tropical cyclone, where the warmer water near the coastline will be able to support the ongoing convection that we saw now to the north and southern periphery of the tropical cyclone, which will help to continue that symmetrical warm chord structure before making landfall. We can also see here the outermost shaded circle indicated in the slightly pink color, indicating the extent of the damaging and gale force winds expanding outward of the system. Now, they are already pushing well onshore, with the Gold Coast recording a wind gust of 107 kilometers an hour a short time ago, which is quite impressive considering the system is quite far offshore. In fact, it's at 200 kilometers offshore at this point in time, which really just highlights the expansive nature of the winds spanning well outward from the core of the system. We can obviously see here the current position of the destructive wind fields still located on that south to southwestern quadrant in the innermost red shaded region, which is more like a oval shape now than comparatively what it has been in previous days, where it was more bean shaped. We can also see that actually begins to shrink as it comes ashore, but certainly still there in nature, with the red innermost ring on landfall indicating where the most destructive winds will be located on landfall, with possible gusts up to 155 kilometers an hour and certainly sustained winds over 100 kilometers an hour within this region. Looks to be around the Moreton Island and Stradbroke Island regions, possibly just east of the Brisbane metro area. And then we've obviously got the grey cone of uncertainty indicating the potential for deviation of the track path, with the erratic and unpredictable nature of this system, which is actually being steered by 3 different influences at this point in time, which has caused both the stalling of the system as well as the deviation in previous days to the track path. But in general, there is good consensus that the landfall will likely be somewhere around the Brisbane metro area, but it could be a little bit further north or a little bit further south, plus or minus each direction for these areas, which is obviously indicated once again in the cone of uncertainty. We are expecting a coastal landfall for Alfred sometime around midday, being Saturday, so 12 p.m. Saturday Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. But once again, this is just the best forecast estimate at this time. There is a possibility that it could come actually earlier than this, or it could come later than this, and there could also be some deviation to the exact track path that the system takes for the landfall crossing. So definitely something that needs to continually be monitored over the next 24 hours for when and where it will cross. Here's how things currently look on the HWF model, one of the high risk tropical cyclone models. If we drag this out here, we can see as it makes the landfall crossing likely around that Stradbroke Island region just south of the Brisbane metro, we can see the most intense convective bands still placed on the southern to southwestern quadrant, likely with the most intense wind gusts somewhere in the southern portion of the southeast Queensland region, likely around that Gold Coast, potentially pushing it as far south as the Byron Bay region. And that's of course caused by the clockwise flow of the tropical cyclone, where we have these veered wind ripping up the backside of the tropical cyclone parallel to the coast and really smashing into the southern portion of southeast Queensland, and then of course ripping back up the coast more toward the Stradbroke and Moreton Bay area. But of course the northeast New South Wales region, once again not out of the woods here, where we can expect some very powerful wind gusts too on the southerly portion of the system, likely around the Byron Bay area, especially around that New South Wales Queensland border, where they too will be experiencing some very powerful wind gusts, sustained winds, as well as very dangerous and powerful sea and surf conditions. Comparing now to HAFS A, we can see the HAFS A model is also calling for a landfall scenario likely just on the Stradbroke Island region, with of course the most powerful portion of the tropical cyclone on landfall around the southern to westerly quadrants of this system. The HAFS A model perhaps showing a little bit more of a robust convective band on the southerly portion of the system, possibly picking up on the convection that was ongoing in the satellite imagery earlier, but still relatively good consensus and agreement between both models where they place the system landfalling as around a 980 millibar tropical cyclone. If we look at the 10 meter wind speed, so the surface winds, we can see here once again on the southerly to southwesterly quadrant of the system where the winds are veering from the southeast to the south and then running up toward the westerly portion of the system parallel to the coast. We can see a good portion here indicated in red, denoting wind speeds of around 55 knots, which is consistent with the Bureau of Meteorology's forecasting that they've been placing for the last couple of days, which translates to wind speeds of around 100 kilometers per hour. If we also pull up the 850 millibar wind speeds, which are wind speeds 1.5 kilometers above ground level or just above the surface, we like looking at these wind speeds because they represent wind gusts that could be mixed down by convection and thunderstorms occurring, because they're not subject to the frictional forces occurring at the surface. We can obviously see here quite a large swath of the purple coloring, which indicates wind speeds of around 80 to 85 knots, certainly consistent with the forecasting where we can be expecting wind gusts of up to 155 kilometers an hour in speed. And then of course we have a much broader swath of the red coloring, which indicates wind speeds of up to 65 knots, sort of representing the gust potential of up to 120 kilometers an hour. But we can see here it is quite widespread, and it could certainly push further north or south than what is indicated here, but a general representation that the potential for these wind gust strengths are certainly there with the system. If we switch to focusing on the accumulated rainfall associated with this system, when we bring up Axis G, which is the Australian global forecast model, and continue to drag this out for the next couple of days, we can see here that Axis G is certainly indicating quite a widespread scenario of rainfall for southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales. Some of these areas are going to be looking at very serious flooding concerns, particularly around the Brisbane metro area, where we could be looking at falls of around 600 millimeters that have been relatively consistent on this forecast model for the last couple of days. Certainly a very wide swath outside of this of falls up to 400 to 500 millimeters outlined in the sort of the green coloring. But we can also see that it spans very wide outside of the actual crossing path of the system, where it pushes all the way down into very southern portions of northeast New South Wales, potentially even further south than Kempsey and Armidale. And then of course back to the northern extent, where we could be expecting falls of around 300 millimeters just west of the Gympie area. And then outside of that, the rainfall also pushing into portions of the Darling Downs, where regions like Toowoomba could be looking at 150 millimeters of accumulated rainfall as the tropical low tracks over that region after completing the coastal crossing. And we see here by early next week, around Monday, that the rainfall has actually pushed very far into New South Wales. In fact, we could be seeing rainfall nearly into central New South Wales by early next week around the Narrabri area, which is quite a concerning development, as the persistent and widespread nature of this rainfall is likely to generate genuine both riverine and flash flooding concerns for what will be a very huge area, especially though around the southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales region, particularly around the border area and the Brisbane metro. The European model also indicating a very similar scenario, where we can see very widespread rainfall across both southeast Queensland and northeast New South Wales, spanning backward into the Darling Downs as well as almost into central New South Wales by early next week, still very much centered around the southeast Queensland Brisbane metro area, as well as the border between northern New South Wales and Queensland. A little bit of discrepancy here obviously appearing for the exact nature of how much rainfall will be accumulated, but certainly a good signal for the widespread coverage of heavy rainfall over the next couple of days leading into early next week. We can also see here on the GFS just the widespread nature of the system in terms of spatial extent, certainly on landfall crossing, once again indicating the most intense portion of the system on the southerly quadrant. And then as we drag this out, we can see it really does push into New South Wales, certainly into central New South Wales by early next week, and then maybe even the Sydney area by around next week, with the remnants of the system still lingering around and driving that heavy rainfall all the way south to these portions of New South Wales. And that's pretty much going to do it for today's forecast video. We've covered off on the extended nature of the coastal crossing for the tropical cyclone, as well as the hazards and potential impacts from the system. The heavy rainfall likely to generate some significant concerns for southeast Queensland and even northeast New South Wales for both flash and riverine flooding effects, driven primarily by the slow moving and persistent nature of the system that we've obviously already seen with the stalling potential that it has endured over the last couple of days. We'll continue to monitor and provide updates on this system as it nears closer to the imminent coastal crossing tomorrow, with the potential for even further changes to the forecast in terms of the coastal crossing time and exact coastal crossing scenario. Even as close as we are to the imminent landfall now, we can still see changes in the forecast. That's just the nature of these tropical systems. They're very erratic and unpredictable, and even a small influence in the atmosphere can change the forecast dramatically. For now though, that'll pretty much do it. Please remember to keep subscribing and turning on notifications, as well as liking and commenting on the video so we can be pushed higher in the algorithm and get this information out to those who need it. This support has been greatly appreciated previously on the past videos. Stay tuned for further updates, and we'll catch you in the next forecast tomorrow.